G'day and welcome to another one of our installation videos. In this video we're going to be talking about the differences in the flywheel from the SR250 Special to the SR250 Classic, and we'll be installing some advance brackets which increase advance by 5 or 6 degrees on the SR250 Classic. And if you're interested in the SR250 Special, go and check that video out in the link below. But this one here for the SR250 Classic we'll go through shortly. I'll set up the tripod and talk about the differences between these two flywheels. So throughout the SR250's model history there was two versions of flywheel. On the left we have the version for the SR250 Special, which was produced in Japan from 1980 to 85. There's some 85 model ones in Australia, but I think the rest of the world got between 1980 and 83 model ones. And the other version of the flywheel is this one here to the right, which is for the SR250 Classic models, which were produced in the Spanish factory. I think the Spanish factory also produced another 2 or 3 different models, but they all had this style of flywheel. They work both in the same way, but you see the differences very obviously. So if you're working on your bike and you want to install our ignition advance brackets, you want the first version of brackets for the Special if your flywheel looks like this, and you want the Classic version or the later model SR250 model version if your flywheel looks like this. On the inside is where we see some more differences. So SR250 Special on the left here, we've got a divided magnetic field structure, and on the right it's sealed. So this is better from a weather perspective, but I haven't had one of these fail, so I don't think they're an issue. But the two models are not interchangeable because the pickup is slightly different. So you can see the pickup here is these machined raised bosses on the model for the SR250 Specials, and for the SR250 Classics you can see it's just one central boss in the middle there, and they're different heights, different diameters, different widths, so the pickups will not work if you try and interchange these. So why don't I get the bike set up and we'll start looking at installing this version here. Just before we get stuck in, I'd like to present the contents of the kit. We have our 2 machine brackets. One is a bracket here, one is a clamp here, and then we have all of our installation hardware included. So we have an M3 countersunk screw which attaches the machine bracket to the bike. We have an M3 button head screw together with a locking washer, M3 locking washer, and a large M3 washer, plain flat washer, and those together are assembled and hold the ignition pickup in place. And then for the clamp itself, we swap out the existing screws for an M6 button head bolt with a locking washer. And all 3 bolts are Allen head hex drive, like that. Yeah, let's get into the installation. So first things first, we're going to remove the engine side cover here. So we're going to take off the gear linkage and remove the cover. I've mentioned this in other videos and I thought I'd mention it here too, but a lot of the screws and bolts on the Japanese bikes from the 70s, 80s and 90s are with a JIS bit, so that's not a standard Phillips. So my recommendation, buy a set of JIS bits and get yourself an impact driver, an impact wrench. So if these bolts are stubborn, I've already backed these out, but if these are stubborn, you want to push that in hard there and give it a tap on the end here, boom, and loosen those. That's the way you get some pretty stubborn bolts loose. Just a bit of advice there. Okay, now we've got the crankcase cover off, it's time to remove these 2 screws here, which are, as you see, JIS bits. They have a dot on them, which means JIS, so get your suitably sized JIS bit and remove those 2 and let this hang aside. Okay, so we've removed those 2 screws, these guys here, and you can put those aside. They are not needed because all the screws needed for this installation are included in the kit. So we'll just leave this sitting aside, and then we are going to install the first bracket, which actually gets pushed in behind here. So I'll get that ready and I'll show you the process of doing that. So for the next phase of the installation, we're going to be using the first bracket here, the machine bracket, and the M3 screw with the countersunk head, this one here. And what we're going to try and do is we're going to try and feed this behind that boss there and fish it up and manage to pick up this thread here. So what I'll do is I'll leave the camera rolling and I'll show you a bit of a trick that I've learnt to use a different Allen key, and I'll leave the camera rolling and show you how I do that. And once you've managed to fish this up and engage the threads and pull it tight, just make sure that it lines up as far in that direction as possible before buttoning it up nice and tight. So we'll tighten that up like that, and that's the first part of the bracket installed. And now the next part of the installation, to get this piece sitting on our new moved position here, we want to get our M3 button head bolt, this one, and place the M3 lock washer onto it, plus the M3 large flat washer to create this little assembly. And then we're going to push that through the hole of the ignition pickup and get it started in the hole here. And we're going to screw that in until it's almost tight, but we won't do it up completely because we want to get the other part of the bracket, the clamp, installed first. So we'll screw that in, almost tight but not completely, so it's got a little bit of movement in it. Now I've moved the camera so you can see this side of the installation a little bit better, but the next part of the install is to get the clamp piece, this guy here, and the boss here goes in the hole of the ignition pickup like this, and that just gets placed there. And then we get our M6 button head bolt and make an assembly of that with our M6 lock washer here, and then we simply line those up, and if I get my hand out of the way so you can see, we screw that one down. And I'll move the camera here. As with the other side, we're going to screw it almost completely tight, but we still want a little bit of movement in it so that we can adjust our tolerances correctly on the flywheel. So I'll line up our pickup and we're going to gap it because that's very important. I'll show you what I mean. Okay, now we can clearly see the gap in here between the pickup and the flywheel, and what we need to do is pull around so we get the pickup boss, which we see coming up here, and we're going to gap that. And what we want is 0.5 millimeters. So the best thing to get is a feeler gauge, or you can do it by eye or feeling if you're good at that. And that's plus minus 0.05 mil. So if it's 0.45 mil or 0.55 mil, that's also okay. But I'm going to slide this under here and push this bracket down as tight as I can onto this until it starts moving back very roughly, which means that I have contact on both sides of that. So that's clamped in there, and while it's clamped in there, or while I have the right gap, depends on how you do it, you can tighten up these bolts. So I'll tighten these up at this perfect 0.5 millimeter gap. Okay, now the kit is completely installed. I've got the perfect 0.5 millimeter gap right between the pickup and the pickup boss, and I've tightened down my screws nice and tight so that they're not going to come loose. I will now show a clip of the timing advanced before and after, so you can see the exact effect of what this does. So on the next video, on the next clip, look out for this pickup here, which marks out, and here's our timing marks. So the T is top dead center, and here is the timing range for the advance. So let's take a look at that. Okay, so we saw we've increased ignition advance by 5 or 6 degrees, and we can see all the way from initial ignition timing all the way up to full advance that we've increased base timing by 5 or 6 degrees, so the whole curve follows up. And that completes our installation. We see our brackets installed here. So now all that's left to do is put the crankcase cover back on and the gear lever assembly, and Bob's your uncle. Cheers for joining us. Happy wrenching and happy riding.